the spring of 1945, as Allied forces swept across Germany, they encountered something unexpected among the prisoners they captured: German women. These weren't just civilians caught in the crossfire. They were female auxiliaries, concentration camp guards, and military support personnel who had served the Third Reich. What shocked these German women POWs wasn't captivity itself, but something they witnessed that shattered their entire worldview. American women in uniform, confidently handling weapons with the same proficiency as their male counterparts. This is the story of a cultural collision that revealed the fundamental difference between two nations at war, not just on the battlefield, but in how they viewed half their population. To understand the profound shock these German women experienced, we must first understand the worlds from which they came. In Nazi Germany, the role of women was explicitly defined by Adolf Hitler himself. He declared that German women existed to be good wives and mothers, and to produce more babies for the Third Reich. Hitler even mocked Americans as degenerate for putting their women to work in factories and war industries. Under Nazi ideology, women were tied to the concept of Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. The regime initially imposed quotas limiting women in universities, particularly in law and medicine, restricting female medical students to just 10% of the total. Women were seen, in the words of Nazi propaganda, as incubators of new German soldiers. Yet even the Third Reich couldn't maintain this ideology in the face of total war. As millions of German men marched off to the Eastern and Western fronts, the regime grudgingly allowed women to fill essential roles. By 1944, over 500,000 German men worked in anti-aircraft defense alone, but they weren't enough. Another 65,000 women and thousands of young girls were pressed into service, manning flak batteries, operating searchlights, and working guidance systems. German women served as Red Cross nurses on the front lines, often finding themselves under fire. A few, like test pilot Hannah Reich and nurse Elfriede Wunk, even earned Iron Crosses for their valor. Approximately 200,000 women served as auxiliary helpers, Wehrmachthelferinnen, in administrative roles, transport, and communications. But here's what's crucial. Even as German women filled these roles out of desperate necessity, they were never truly seen as equals. They were temporary placeholders for men. They were never trained as combat soldiers. They never received weapons training as a matter of policy. The very idea contradicted everything the Nazi state claimed to stand for. Across the Atlantic, a different story was unfolding. When Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America faced a choice. To win a two-front war against the Axis powers would require total mobilization, and that meant everyone, including women. Unlike Nazi Germany, the United States didn't hesitate. Approximately 350,000 American women joined the military during World War II. They served in the Women's Army Corps, the Navy Waves, the Marine Corps Women's Reserve, and the Coast Guard Spars. More than 1,600 female nurses were decorated for bravery under fire. 68 American servicewomen were captured as POWs in the Philippines. 565 WACs, serving in the Pacific Theater, earned combat decorations. But perhaps most significantly for our story, American women received weapons training. In Britain, where American forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, women of the Auxiliary Territorial Service operated anti-aircraft batteries. They were given rifle practice and taught to use anti-aircraft guns. One period report noted with barely concealed astonishment, many men were amazed that women could make adequate gunners despite their excitable temperament, lack of technical instincts, their lack of interest in airplanes, and their physical weaknesses. The women of the 93rd Searchlight Regiment were all female. They trained with weapons. They manned positions under fire, while officially told this was in case the Germans invaded. These women were combat-ready members of the Allied war machine. American women didn't just serve and support roles. At Camp Ritchie in Maryland, approximately 200 women in the Women's Army Corps received specialized intelligence training. They helped train servicemen in how to interrogate German prisoners of war. They translated POW testimonies. They were entrusted with classified information and sophisticated analytical work. Ellen Kaufman Boucher, a Jewish refugee who had fled Nazi Germany after her family was deported to their deaths, joined the WAC in 1943 specifically to fight the regime that had murdered her loved ones. She trained men to interrogate German POWs, translating the experiences and testimonies of enemy prisoners. A woman teaching men about warfare. Now, imagine you are a German woman who has spent years under Nazi ideology. You've been told that women wielding weapons is unnatural, degenerate, a sign of America's moral decay. You've been taught that a woman's strength lies in motherhood, not marksmanship. That women are too emotional, too weak, too fundamentally unsuited for military service. Then you become a prisoner of war. As Allied forces overran Germany in the final months of the war, they captured not just Wehrmacht soldiers, but also the female auxiliaries and guards who had served the Nazi regime. These women were processed as prisoners and held in Allied custody. And there, for the first time, many encountered American servicewomen. Picture the scene: German female prisoners, exhausted and defeated, being processed by American forces. And there, among the American soldiers, are women in uniform. Women carrying clipboards, yes, but also women in combat boots, women who move with military precision, women who speak with authority. And most shocking of all, women at the firing range. American servicewomen were required to maintain weapons proficiency. Female guards at POW facilities trained with rifles and sidearms. The WACs who worked in intelligence and administrative roles still completed basic training, which included marksmanship. For the German women POWs, watching American women confidently handle rifles, hearing the crack of gunfire as these women hit their targets, seeing them field strip and clean their weapons with practiced ease. The irony
must have been a
runs
revelation,
even deeper
or
when we
perhaps
consider how
a
German
shock to the
POWs,
system.
male prisoners, were treated in America. Over 370,000 German POWs were held in camps across the United States during the war. These men were housed in facilities spread across the country, from California to Virginia, from Utah to Georgia. Under the Geneva Convention, they received wages, access to beer and wine, opportunities for recreation and education. And they met American women. Unauthorized fraternization between American women and German prisoners sometimes became an issue. Several camps even held social receptions, where German POWs met local American girls. Some Germans married American women they met while imprisoned. These male POWs were generally treated well. A 1943 poll found that 74% of Americans blamed the German government, not German people, for the war. The prisoners often worked on farms and in factories, laboring alongside American women in the civilian workforce. One former POW, Alex Funk, later wrote, "We all were positively impressed by the U.S. and we all had been won over to friendly relations." Another POW noted that when captured he weighed 128 pounds, but after 2 years as an American prisoner, he weighed 185 pounds. These German men witnessed something extraordinary: a nation at total war where women worked in factories, drove buses and trains, managed farms, and served in uniform. They saw American women as breadwinners, as professionals, as soldiers. And rather than viewing this as degenerate, many came to see it as a sign of American strength. The shock of German female POWs at seeing American women firing rifles reveals something profound about the nature of the conflict they'd just lost. Nazi Germany had gone to war claiming the superiority of their ideology, their system, their people. But they had done so while relegating half their population to subordinate roles, even as military necessity forced them to deploy women in increasingly important positions. The United States, for all its own shortcomings and prejudices, had mobilized its entire society. American women weren't just filling in for men, they were integral members of the war effort. They flew military aircraft as test pilots and ferry pilots. They cracked enemy codes. They designed weapons. They treated wounded soldiers under fire. And yes, they trained with and carried rifles. The female Red Cross nurses who served in the German military, the women who manned flak batteries, the auxiliaries who kept the Wehrmacht's communications running. These German women had proved their capability under the most demanding circumstances. Yet they had done so in a system that viewed their contributions as temporary aberrations, necessary evils to be corrected once the men returned. The American women they encountered as POWs operated in a different paradigm. Not a perfect one. American servicewomen faced discrimination, and after the war, many were pushed out of jobs and military roles. But they had proved a point that the Nazi ideology could never accept, that women could be trained, could be trusted, could be warriors. What became of these German women POWs who witnessed American women with rifles? Most were eventually repatriated to a Germany that lay in ruins. They returned to a society struggling to rebuild, to a nation undergoing a painful process of denazification and confronting the horrors committed in its name. Some, like the American male POWs who had been held in Germany, emigrated to the United States. About 5,000 German POWs eventually made America their home, drawn by the democracy and opportunity they'd witnessed even in captivity. The women they'd seen, the American servicewomen who had shocked them, faced their own battles. Despite surveys showing that a majority of female veterans wanted to keep their jobs, many were forced out by returning men and a downturn in demand for war materials. Women veterans encountered roadblocks when trying to access GI Bill benefits. The nation that needed their help in crisis wasn't yet ready for the greater social equality they'd earned. But something had changed irreversibly. American women had proved they could do anything men could do, including firing rifles. They'd done it on firing ranges, in training camps, and in some cases, under fire. They'd served with distinction, earned decorations, and contributed to Allied victory. The German women POWs who witnessed this represented a generation caught between two worlds. They'd served a regime that viewed them as breeding stock who happened to be useful in wartime emergencies. They'd encountered a nation that, for all its flaws, had entrusted women with weapons, responsibilities, and authority unthinkable in Nazi Germany. The image of German women POWs watching American women fire rifles isn't just a curiosity of history. It's a snapshot of a civilizational divide. It reveals what happens when half a society is empowered versus when half is subjugated. It shows the practical consequences of ideology meeting reality. The Third Reich proclaimed that women belonged in the home, even as total war forced them into factories and flak batteries. America proclaimed that everyone had a role to play in defending democracy, and backed it up by putting rifles in women's hands and trusting them to use them. In that moment, German women POWs watching American women at the firing range, we see reflected the outcome of the war itself. Not just won by industrial might or military strategy, but by the full mobilization of free people. All of them, including the women with rifles,